Now I'd like to introduce our next speaker. You're probably wondering what the Global Center for Journalism and Democracy is all about. So she will tell you about the center. Please welcome Kelli Arena. She's the founding executive director of GCJD, was CNN's former justice and investigative correspondent, and the first recipient of the Dan Rather Chair of Journalism of the Sam Houston State University. Let's welcome Kelli.
Hi, everyone. We are really excited to be here. We are especially excited to be joining with Rappler, which is doing some incredible things in your country and around the world, because we are so interconnected now in ways that we couldn't have imagined just 10 years ago. The Global Center for Journalism and Democracy has partnered for this event, and we brought with us a really amazing team of journalists and experts from around the world to help you understand and look at the coverage of natural disasters from a different perspective. We have a journalist from Hawaii with us. We have a journalist and teacher from Beijing. We have a journalist and activist from Cairo, Egypt. We have a disaster relief expert from New York City in the United States. I am here from Texas in the United States, and yes, it's a very weird place, but that is where the Global Center has its home. While Maria spoke about a great deal of change that's going on in our profession, in journalism, and in the way we communicate with each other, I believe that there are still some things that never change. One of them is that human beings, at their very foundation, are storytellers. We have been telling stories since the cavemen existed and drew stories about, killing animals and getting water and the sun and the moon that they saw, right? We know that we are, at our core, storytellers, and we need to be effective storytellers as journalists, as activists, as civil society groups, as NGOs, right? We have stories to tell, and the stories that we tell are stories that can enact change in the world for the better. And so the Global Center was set up to work with all of those groups, with journalists, to make them smarter and to give them resources and to make them hear, to help them to hear different perspectives so that they could better tell stories, to equip the public to act responsibly. We work with political parties and emerging democracies to help them tell their stories so that voters in those countries understand what those political parties represent and figure out if that's the way that they want to move forward. Is that the vision that they share as their countries move forward? We work with civil society groups and activists and NGOs to help them tell their story, because those on-the-ground people are doing incredible things around the world to try to enact change, to try to solve problems that societies face. They are boots on the ground, but they need help sometimes telling their stories. And so the Global Center was set up to work around the globe to help those organizations to better communicate so that society is better served. So some of the projects that we've done, let's start off with Burkina Faso. We were in Burkina Faso, and we were working with journalists there to help them understand the idea of gender equity. It's how to better cover women in positions of leadership, women who were running for political office, and the journalists there were having a really hard time accepting women in those leadership positions. And so the coverage of those women was very poor. And so we went with a team of experts to help those journalists understand how important it was, A, to have women as part of the national conversation that's going on in Burkina Faso, and B, how to cover those women effectively. Without being insulting, without being unfair. It was quite a controversial training. We had some people in the room who really were not welcoming the change that we were presenting to them. But when they left the room, there were a good number, dozens of journalists who started to look at that issue differently, and we have seen a change in the coverage as a result of that being offered a different perspective. We went from Burkina Faso. We've also spent time in Beirut. Here we are in Beirut, Lebanon. We were working with journalists who are just starting to cover the oil and gas industry. There was a big discovery of oil and gas off the coast of Lebanon and Cyprus and Israel. And journalists there had never really covered that subject before. They didn't understand the terminology. They didn't understand the technology for getting the oil and gas out from under the sea and getting it to land. And so we put together a team of experts, journalists and industry experts and environmental experts to come and help those journalists understand and realize the questions that they should be asking, how to push for government transparency, how they could responsibly cover that story, that emerging sector for the public, because there's a big promise of money that comes with oil, and the public is very in need of a reality check. How are things happening? Is there corruption? Is the money being spent in the right way? So we armed them with information and knowledge so that they could go forward and do a good job. Over in Tunisia, which should be next, there we are, we met with political parties and some women in government there. We also worked with some NGOs in Tunisia that were monitoring elections. And our work in Tunisia was basically focused on helping new political parties that had never existed before. We helped them understand how important it was to come up with a platform. What did those political parties stand for, and what was their vision for Tunisia's future? And so we brought in political consultants, we brought in some journalists, we brought in some communication strategists to work with those political parties and those NGOs and some of those female politicians to help them tell their stories. And I think we have one more example of something we've done. This was actually in Poland, where we worked with journalists. Actually, Poland is celebrating 25 years of democracy this year. So it's a very important watershed moment in that country. And journalists there are very interested in finding out how journalists in other democracies are operating as they continue to move forward in their democratic journey. The journalists that we worked with were very interested in learning how to track funds, money from the European Union that were going into very small communities, just like you get money here in Tacloban from a variety of organizations, right? What is happening with that money? Is it being used in the way that it was intended? Were the decisions that were made about the spending of that money the correct decisions? And there is no better group of individuals to hold donors and recipients of money accountable than journalists. So we went and had that discussion with student and professional journalists in Poland to help them better follow the money from its source to the small communities that it was intended to help, and to help them hold those officials accountable to make sure that society is best served. And so here we are in the Philippines. And we are here to discuss the coverage of natural disasters. And as I said, we've brought a really interesting and diverse team of experts who are going to share some of their own personal experiences, some of what they know has worked in the past, to give you advice and guidance as you move forward, whatever your role in society is. If you are a professor, if you are a student, if you are a professional journalist, if you are working with an NGO, this information can make you more powerful. Because as human beings share information from learned experiences, we all grow. And in turn, we're expecting to grow as well. Because whenever we go into another country, we are not here to impose our beliefs or our way of doing things on those that we serve. We are here to offer some ideas and suggestions and to work in partnership with those that we come in contact with to try to help eventually make the world a better place. Now that sounds a little corny. It sounds like I'm looking at the world through rose-colored glasses, right? But I truly believe that information is power, and that the more creative, the more efficient, the ways that if we work toward that as a goal, to be efficient, powerful communicators in the world, we can make a difference. And so whatever role you're currently playing in the world and in your society, my hope is that you learn something today, that you leave re-energized with some fresh perspective, and then I can at least say that we were successful in what we did here. Journalism is an incredibly powerful tool. I've been a journalist for 30 years. It's a very long time. And I've seen incredible change. You will continue to see incredible change, but let's not forget that at its very core, we are sharing information, and that good old-fashioned things like accuracy, fact-finding, turning to credible sources of information so that we best serve the public are still very important no matter where the technology takes us. So that's my hope for 2030, is that despite all of the amazing advances that we've seen around the world technologically, that we never forget what our function, what our mission is as communicators. And that's to do good, right? So use your power to do good, not evil. All right? All right. Thank you.